So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for tonight's event, the Oceans Lead at SYSTEMIQ, Adrien Vincent. Adrien, over to you.
Thank you very much, Marcus, and thank you to the Conduit for organizing this ocean session and having us as a moderator and speaker. So indeed, I'm leading the ocean activities of SYSTEMIQ, and in particular, I was one of the lead authors of the final report commissioned by the high-level panel for sustainable ocean economy that was published last year. And today I work on a number of ocean topics with a focus on ocean finance, seaweed, and coral reefs. Before I leave the floor to our three great speakers, I would just like to share some considerations and key facts to set the scene for our session. So first of all, let me remind you the importance of ocean food to our societies. As of today, more than 3 billion people rely on ocean food as a source of protein and nutrients, especially when it comes to omega-3 fatty acids and iodine. And today, the ocean food sector represents around 237 million jobs. The second set of considerations is that we need to recognize that the way we harvest today the ocean for food is not sustainable. So if you look at the FAO statistics, more than a third of fish stocks are currently overfished. And this overfishing, together with other drivers of pressure on the ocean, has contributed to a decrease of 50% of the ocean biodiversity over the past 50 years. And if you look at projections on their business as usual scenarios, scientists expect that the yield from these wild-caught fisheries will decline by 20% by 2050. Next to fisheries, we have ocean aquaculture that I will refer to as mariculture, which is on the rise as an industry, but is still today facing a number of sustainability challenges when it comes to the sourcing of fish feed, or when it comes to the effluents released in the marine ecosystems or fish escapes. And finally, in terms of unsustainability of such a current value chain, around 35% of fish and seafood is currently wasted in the value chain. The third element of introduction is I'm referring to a big study that was published a couple of years ago by the Eat Lancet Commission, and they ran a big model to try and define what could be a scenario to feed a growing global population in a healthy and sustainable way by 2050. And they recognize the importance of these nutrients and elements that ocean food provide. And so as a result, if we were all to adopt this recommended healthy and sustainable diet, we would need to increase by 60 to 120% the fish and ocean seafood production by 2050 compared to 2010 levels. So having these elements in mind, I think the objective of tonight is to discuss with our speakers, how do we reconcile these potentially conflicting trends? On one hand, the need for more seafood and the importance of seafood for local economies, livelihoods, and food security. And on the other hand, the destruction of one of our most precious ecosystems. I'm sure many of you has watched this now very famous Netflix documentary, Seaspiracy, which I think the main message is stop eating seafood. So should we just follow this recommendation? Or are there ways to continue to eat ocean food, but that is sustainably produced and sourced and managed, or even is produced in a way that helps regenerate the ocean health? And so to answer this kind of challenges and questions, I'm really delighted to welcome tonight our three world-class speakers. So of course, ladies first, I will start with Marta Marrero Martin, who is the Nature Conservancy's Ocean Governance Director. So Marta has been directing the Oceans Governance Program at the Nature Conservancy since 2016. She's an environmental lawyer with 13 years of experience protecting nature through international and European Union policy and law. Welcome, Marta. Then we have Chris Gorell Barnes, who is a digital entrepreneur and a marine conservationist. Chris is famous for his award-winning documentary, The End of the Line, among other things. He's also the co-founder of a marine conservation charity called the Blue Marine Foundation, which is today recognized as one of the leading charities dedicating to creating marine protected areas. And finally, he's also, as a Swiss knife that he is, he's also the founding partner of Ocean 14 Capital, which is a VC fund focused on sustainable and regenerative blue economy. So welcome, Chris. And finally, we have James Fox-Davies, who is the chairman of the Seafish Aquaculture Leadership Group. James is the director of 360 Aquaculture, who is growing warm-water shrimp in the UK, as well as algae-based products. And James is also the director of Fowie Shellfish Company, which is the UK's first organic mussel farm, growing sustainable mussels off the coast of Cornwall and processing scallops for retail and wholesale. So without further ado, I'm now going to test a bit these questions with our speakers. And we'll start with Marta. Marta, so today I introduce some numbers and consideration at the global level when it comes to fishing, but one could expect that dynamics at play will be different between regions. So could you please help us understand what are the key challenges and sources of hope when it comes to fisheries in the global north and in the global south?
Thank you, Adrien, and thanks for the Conduit for organizing this great event, very timely as well. It is for me, it is a little challenging to talk about north, south, east, west when it comes to the ocean, because I see this as one ocean and the challenges are truly global. However, there are some nuances, and I'll get into those in a second, but I'd like to focus on two main challenges. Of course, there are several challenges, unfortunately, but also hopes. I think you were framing your question as challenges and hopes, so to see the bad and the good of these issues. I'll focus on two, but there are more, of course. But we, for the sake of time, I'll try to be brief and direct. The first challenge is something that not many people know about, but it's one of the biggest challenges that we are facing right now, which is the lack of management and regulation. So we're talking about a Wild West situation right now in the vast majority of the ocean. So this is 64% of our ocean doesn't have any comprehensive regulation to tackle not only fisheries, it's beyond that. So it's marine biodiversity. So we are talking as well as, about marine genetic resources. Still today in 2021, even for me, I've been working on these topics for several years, and it's still quite shocking to realize and to observe that the international community has not yet agreed on such a comprehensive regulatory scheme that we very much need. In a nutshell, and to try to put things in simple words, we love to talk about the blue economy and the blue growth. Well, that is not going to be possible if you do not have this regime in place, what we call a high seas treaty. Again, this is 50% of the planet, or in other words, 64% of the ocean. Now, the good thing is that countries finally, a couple of years ago, agreed to sit down and to talk about the content of a high seas treaty. So this is happening right now, and NGOs like myself and others are playing some role in this to make sure two things. First, that a treaty exists ASAP. So we are talking about 2021, ideally. Of course, the pandemic has delayed many agendas, but we are hoping to see some good progress this year, but also that the treaty has some teeth and that it is ambitious and not just, as we would say in my country, like wet paper, right? You want things to have a value. And for that, we are looking at key players in the room to take a leading role. I would like to mention just a few, but for example, the US, the UK, the EU, China, Japan, etc. No other big maritime nations. But let's not forget as well about the developing states. We're working as well with them so that they speak up and try to ensure to strike the balance, between exploitation and conservation. Because as you say, Adrien, we love fish. We want to continue eating fish. So we need to make sure that the measures are there. The second challenge that I would like to share with you is something, because of its nature and linked to the Seaspiracy documentary, very interesting one, is the issue of illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. So here, yes, it is a global challenge, but we are seeing on the ground that in the regions where governance and resources are scarce or weak, this activity, IUU fishing, takes place more often. We have seen recently, over the last few months, and I'm sure many of you have been reading the news on this, that this issue is actually increasingly creating geopolitical tensions. We have seen between Latin American countries and China, also between China and Japan. And yesterday, I was reading the news that NATO has sent a message, for example, to China, requesting them to respect international rules, including in the maritime space. So this is a clear example, no, that this is still a challenge. The hope, the good things that we have seen in the work that we do globally, we have seen really good progress and strong political will, for example, in the EU, in the US, in Japan. Very recently, they are actually changing legislation as we speak. Kenya has spoken up clearly. They want to take action at the regional level even and globally. APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation as well, they have IUU fishing in the agenda. So these are all good signs, but it is not enough because we still have some of the major maritime nations not really taking any action, not really changing their measures, their policies and laws, and building institutional capacity and talking to other countries to tackle this global issue. And we are hoping to see that happening in the next few years, hopefully. So yeah, that's in a nutshell. Thanks, Adrien.
Thank you so much, Marta, and thank you for reminding us that we are talking about one ocean that connects us all. Even if National Geographic yesterday recognized the Southern Ocean as the fifth ocean, I think we can still say that we all depend on one ocean. And I'll come back to you with some more concrete suggestions or what would be a bit your kind of wish list when it comes to political and policy measures to move the needle. Talking about this international momentum around sustainable fishing, or more broadly speaking, sustainable management of the ocean, we have seen this rising push for marine protected areas, and the UK, for instance, is playing a leading role when it comes to this agenda of 30% marine protected areas in the global ocean by 2030. At the same time, it's still commonly thought or considered that conservation and marine protected areas are potentially antagonists to fishing activities, and they cannot really work together, and we need to choose one or the other. Chris, I'm now turning to you with your Blue Marine Foundation experience. Can you help us understand a bit if this is really a challenge to bring together the sustainable fishing agenda and this marine protected agenda, or if you can help us debunk the myth and that these activities could instead go well hand in hand?
I will. Firstly, thank you very much for putting on this conduit. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. Firstly, I just want to say my opinion, which will lead to answering your question. I'm not answering your question. I just want to, build on what you said about Seaspiracy, because I expect, and this is one of the frustrations of Zoom, is you can't actually ask an audience. Normally, I'd stand up on stage and I'd ask everyone to put their hands up who'd seen the film. Not all fishermen or fisher women or fisher people are the bad guys, right? That's the thing, okay? And this film has done a great job of making an audience, albeit a probably primarily white Netflix audience, think about the ocean and care about the ocean and ask the right questions. However, to have a conclusion which is not hopeful into what you said, Marta, it's important to have hope, and just to tell the world to stop eating fish is not very helpful, right? It's not helpful at all, because most of the most disadvantaged, poorest people on the planet rely on fish as their main source of protein. So it's very easy for me sitting here in London to say I'm not going to eat fish and I'm going to be a vegan and I'm going to go to some Ponzi restaurant in Notting Hill, but that's not very helpful for anyone. So number one, great that film has brought the conversation bubbling up to the surface. It's brilliant that there's so much interest in the ocean. Look at the G7, look at the Biden and the Kerry administration, brilliant. We've got amazing headwinds coming to the ocean, and the COP is going to be full of ocean love and ocean action. But, just telling people to stop eating fish isn't helpful. And the bad thing is the industrial fishing practices, right? It's these mammoth, gigantic trawler ships that go and rip and destroy the ocean. They throw fish aggravation devices into MPAs. They pull fish out of marine protected areas. They destroy the bottom of the ocean. They have factories that are, just destroying the ocean. Those are the bad guys. There are many, many ways of fishing well that are sustainable, that are in harmony with nature, in harmony with the ocean. And you can get these amazing models where you can have fish that's sustainable, fish that is good for you and is actually indeed good for the ocean. And so your question was, can we have both? Can we have conservation and fishing? Absolutely. Blue Marine Foundation is all focused on creating marine protected areas and new models of sustainable fishing, right? Now, MPAs, there's certain different MPAs and they're classed in different ways. You can have marine protected areas, which are full no-take zones, where literally you cannot take a thing out of there. And we've developed, funded, and created many of those, some working hand in hand with the Nature Conservancy. And those are the extreme ones where literally there'll be no take zone. But then there are marine protected areas where there are opportunities to do artisanal fishing in. So we have a large marine reserve in Extension in one of the British Overseas Territories, where there's a certain amount of fishing that can be done that is sustainable. Some of it is sport fishing and some of it is artisanal. And that is all based on how do we ensure that this area, which tends to be very rich in biodiversity and a lot of fish, is sustainable, it's sustainably managed. So stop the bad guys coming in with their long lines and ripping everything out, and keep a healthy ecosystem where you can actually take what the fishery can produce. Now we've developed some really exciting initiatives and what I believe to be a kind of a world first model, and we did that in the UK in Lyme Regis in Dorset, which is a place very close to my heart because I grew up there, and it's called the Lyme Bay model. Very creative, and it's a sort of win-win-win, right? It's how do we, and I always think it's arrogant to say educate the fishermen, because the fishermen have got to educate the conservationists as well. So it's got to be a two-way partnership. It's like, how can we work hand in hand to ensure that the fishermen are going to have income in perpetuity, that this fishery is going to be sustainable, and that we can have conservation gains at the same time. So we created this incredible model, which was working with the fishermen to create a code of conduct that they all agreed to about how a particular area would be protected, areas of it would be not fished, that they'd agree to only catch what science-based models said that fishery was capable of fishing, not government models, science. And we've created a model where if you fast forward 6 years, and this is something that was, invested in by Marks and Spencer, it's been a huge success, where you now have a fishery which the fishermen are catching less fish, but they're making more money because the fish are better quality, they're bigger. We're giving them tools that enable them to get the fish to market in a better condition, better quality, whether that's chiller boxes or just even direct sales. So we created a reserve seafood brand where the fish are sold at a premium in restaurants, and James will understand this from his mussels farming. There's a demand for sustainable or even sort of organic fish. So the model has created a managed marine protected area where fauna and flora is coming back like never before. Species are coming back that they haven't seen before. There's an abundance of fish, of lobsters, of shellfish, and the conservationists are very happy and the fishermen are very happy. And that is a really brilliant win-win-win model, and that's now being scaled around the UK. It's in various other ports in the UK. We had an event 2 years ago where we brought fishermen from Greece, fishermen from Italy, fishermen from Spain, fishermen from Turkey to come and understand how this models work. And now that is being initiated in those countries as well, because it's a really, really, really brilliant model. And that works with small scale fisheries. It works, in territorial water, and it is really a great solution for bringing conservation and fishermen together for the benefit of the local economy, the benefit of conservation and the society as a whole.
Thank you so much, Chris, for clarifying these elements that are not always easily perceived, and this kind of myth that these strategies are often seen in opposition. And I also hear from you that there is an invitation to the audience to watch SYSTEMIQ, but to watch it with a critical look and being aware that there is a much more hopeful story behind
watch
realities.
Watch the end of the line first. It's a more realistic, scientifically correct film. But Seaspiracy, great. I'm happy they made it. It's driven the conversation to the top of the agenda. Fantastic, great filmmaking, great narrative, great story building. But let's question the call to action. It's not hopeful, and it's not plausible either.
No, thank you, Chris. And now, James, turning to you. So we have talked a lot about fishing, but mariculture, which I define as marine aquaculture, will also have a massive role to play to supply a healthy and sustainable seafood. But today, we still see a number of concerns by NGOs or by consumers about the sustainability of finfish farming. Can you also tell us about, in the spirit of these reasons for hope, what are recent positive trends or technologies or regulations that you are observing to make mariculture more sustainable?
Yeah, thanks very much, Adrien, and thanks to the Conduit for the invite. So, yeah, I think when we talk about the demand for sustainable protein in the next 20, 30, 40 years, it's definitely, I think we can all agree, it's not going to come from fishing. I mean, that's just, that's we're already arguably, as we've said, in a number of places around the world, overfished. I mean, I think in the UK, we do a pretty good job of managing our fishing grounds. But even here, I don't think there's much argument that we could take much more. I think we're kind of at that limit. And if anything, it probably needs to be reduced. So this is only going to come from aquaculture if we're talking about kind of seafood specifically, and marine seafood in particular. And so, yeah, that it has to be aquaculture. And I think the key really is, how do you do that on a sustainable basis? And I see in the comments some people asking, what does sustainable mean? And I suppose for me, it's, what can you do, and how much can you scale something and not have a negative impact on the environment? You're definitely going to have an impact. That's absolutely categoric. A mussel farm off the coast of Cornwall has an impact. Does it have a positive impact? Is it bringing in more species? Is it, is it protecting that particular area? More importantly, if you rip that farm out in 2-3 years, would the environment look the same as if it had never been there? Arguably, yeah. So for me, that is a kind of sustainable form of aquaculture. We talk about finfish. I'm definitely not here to defend the traditional salmon farming industry. That's not really my kind of area of expertise. But I do think in some instances they get a bad rap. I think there's been in most farms are pretty well managed, certainly in the UK, and I think there will always be certain kind of rogue, issues in certain farms, and I don't think there's any getting away from that. On a technological basis, and actually somebody gave me a good stat. One of the heads of one of the big salmon companies, I think if you put all of the net pens in Scotland into a confined area, it would fit inside Wembley Stadium. So we're not, we kind of, and mentally for me, that kind of put it into context. We're not talking about huge swathes of kind of Scottish waters that are taken up by these farms. The actual kind of pens themselves are, a relatively small footprint. But do they have a negative impact on the environment? Well, yeah, that's a very nuanced question, and certainly, actually, I'm kind of not the right person for that. I mean, you can, you will only ever see the kind of horrific footage of how does it look underneath a salmon pen when it's not correctly looked after. Or when fish haven't been, when the sea lice are out of control. So but the salmon industry do work very, very hard on technological improvements. I mean, there's constant. We were involved with a lumpfish hatchery down in Swansea, and that's a growing cleaner fish. So these are a kind of biological solution to controlling sea lice in farms. So they're always looking at what can be done to improve those farms, and they're very highly audited by their customers, who ultimately are the supermarkets, who are really conscious of what consumers think. So they are audited very heavily. So I think, I think there is as I say, aquaculture is the only way it's going to go. I mean, where I'm coming from technologically is more that really the question should be, in 50 years time, will we be talking about fishing? And I genuinely believe I don't think we will be. I think the idea that we tell our grandchildren that we used to build these huge kind of very costly boats, we used to fill them with fossil fuels. It's the most dangerous job, certainly in the UK. You know, it has the highest death rate and injury rate. And we go out on these boats and we go out doing this thing called fishing, and we burn all this fossil fuel, and we might come back with some fish, we might not come back with some fish, and if we do come back with some fish, it might not be the fish we wanted. You know, that is, if you sold that to an investor as a business model, they'd think you were crazy. I mean, it's not a particularly you know, kind of great way to go and get your protein. So, you know, if I think in sort of 40, 50 years time, hopefully some of these issues would have gone away, because there will be a more efficient, more environmentally sound way of producing our protein. So kind of definitely, and I'm not the man to be talking to you about fishing. Marta certainly has kind of got that down. So where I think the technology is, or where the technology is going, and again, sorry, and I'll just backtrack for a second. So that just the thought of, again, growing salmon in Norway, to put it on a plane, to fly it to China, I just don't think that's going to be a thing. I just don't think I don't even think people are going to register it in 20, 30 years time. It'll just seem absurd that we used to do this. And so the way I think it will go is growing our seafood at point of, you know, at the point of source. So right next to your consumer. So large conurbations, having farms in the same way that they have arable farms and that they have livestock farms. You will have seafood farms outside of major conurbations of varying sizes. Now you've got Atlantic Sapphire in the UK, in Miami in the US. They're trying to produce 180,000 tons of salmon on land in Miami. And they've chosen Miami, I think, a couple of kind of reasons to do with water usage, but mainly because it's a great distribution hub and it's got a huge population. So, you know, they are aiming to produce, I think it's something like a third of the salmon consumed in the US. I mean, that is that's a very kind of bold statement. But I think whether or not everybody goes to that sort of scale, I don't know. Whether or not there's and whether or not we have more of a kind of artisan, you know, maybe it's particular species or particular specialist species that are grown in smaller quantities, and it's smaller farms that have got 100, 200 tons that service, say, a city the size of Birmingham, that kind of thing. As far as kind of sustainability, what are the problems at the moment? Well, one of the problems is the same that the traditional aquaculture community have got, is feed. You know, Seaspiracy quite rightly said, you know, we've got a problem with feed at the moment. You know, we're using bycatch. That's not sustainable. You know, as we just said, there's no more, we can't do more fishing, or we definitely shouldn't do more fishing. So trying to do more fishing to get more bycatch is definitely not the way we want to go. But I think one thing that Seaspiracy, and probably going to touch too much on that, but on Seaspiracy, but one thing they didn't say is, well, yeah, there's loads of people working on that problem. There are single cell proteins being grown. There are algal, you know, people using algae to get to replace oil. As I say, growing single cell proteins to replace fish meal, and that's at the moment a problem of technology, efficiency, and cost. That will get solved. Whether or not it gets solved next month or in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, I couldn't tell you, but that I believe that will get solved. So I think that is obviously an issue. The second is keeping water clean is super expensive. You know, that's where a lot of these land-based farms have kind of failed over the last 10 years, is system design, and everybody underestimates exactly how expensive in terms of electricity it is to keep water clean. That is just kind of dropping off a cliff. I mean, we're getting the water treatment industry in itself are just getting super efficient, and aquaculture is feeding off the back of that. And so the kind of number of technologies, every day there's a new patent, there's a new kind of process. And so as that comes down, you're getting to a point where million square foot building growing salmon, for example, should be able to produce about a third of its energy consumption just from solar on the roof. So, and then the other 2/3, well, yeah, okay, maybe all these things should be built with solar farms or with wind and solar with battery technology. So that's all. Is it here right now? In certain respects, but yeah, will it be here in 20, 30 years? I've got kind of no doubt. I just think that will be. I think, you know, kind of renewables just coming down in price the whole time. So that's another problem, a technological problem with where we are. The other kind of finger pointing that people could do is, well, what about your water usage? Right, okay, well, that's another good good thing. You know, kind of 5 years ago, they might have been 90% efficient. This year, some of people are claiming kind of 99.6% efficient. Will they get up to 99 point something efficient? Yeah, I think it will. I think that's just water treatment, which is just electricity at the end of the day. Environmental discharge, you know, what's coming out of these facilities. You know, obviously got fish waste, you've got waste from uneaten feed, ammonia, you know, kind of what are you doing with these byproducts? Well, again, that's down to, you know, that's at the moment it's economics. Lots of people working on using those wastes for, say, feed, you know, from a fin fish farm produces waste fish waste that then is filtered out, that goes into feed ragworm. Ragworm are one of the best converters, you know, very good at converting into protein, and they're a kind of they're almost perfect for, say, early stage shrimp, as an early stage shrimp feed, which ironically is actually more expensive than salmon per kilo. So you're using your waste to grow something else that you can use to grow something else. So I think there are plenty of places that we can point at, traditional and kind of the future of aquaculture, and say this isn't sustainable. But I think all of those things will get sorted, but it needs investment. It needs investment from the government. It needs private investment. It needs, you know, support in that respect. But I think there's a lot of people who are very well placed to deal with that. And so hopefully that, I can't remember what the question was, but hopefully I've dealt with it somewhere in there.
Thank you so much, Jess. And you also managed very elegantly to answer one of the live questions for the chat about land-based aquaculture systems. And, thank you for your final comment about we need investments. I think we are now halfway through the panel discussion, and thanks to these three great contributions, I think everybody now understands what is at stake and what are the big trends and how conceptually we could be producing sustainable seafood in the future. I'd like to spend the second half of the panel discussion discussing really about concrete solutions and what is happening on the markets. And so we'll start with Marta. Coming back to you, Marta, you mentioned this political momentum around the High Sea Treaty. Chris mentioned the political momentum about G7, the upcoming COP26. We also have the high-level panel for sustainable ocean economy that brought together 14 heads of state that committed to a number of ambitious transformations in the ocean space. The European Union announced last month also an ambitious blue economy strategy, sustainable strategy. So we have all these great declarations and great announcements. So how do we make sure this does not end up as just a talk shop and just nice words? So what would be a bit your wish list, and what would you be the concrete practical policies you would like to see those policymakers and political leaders to put in place to start making it happen?
Yeah, perfect. So I'll share with you some very concrete actions, both on fisheries and also on aquaculture, if I may. I'm not the expert, but I think it will link very nicely to the key word that James was saying about investment. But starting with fisheries, and let me say, so the G7, I smiled when Chris mentioned this, because we've actually, definitely the ocean is in the political agenda, but we have made sure as well that is the case. You know, yeah, we've been pushing a lot over the last month, so that environment ministers first, and then the heads of state really commit to taking some action. So that's really good to see. So it's on fisheries. I wanted to share 4 points, very concrete actions. So connecting a bit to what I was saying earlier. So first of all, the adoption as soon as possible. So ideally in 2021, but if pandemic doesn't allow, then 2022, the latest, of an ambitious high seas treaty. And for that, many of the countries that have signed up to these high-level declarations, Adrien, that you were mentioning, they need to step up and they need to raise their voice in the upcoming negotiations. If they are not happening in August, they will be happening a few months later, and we are expecting them to follow their written statements. Secondly, we need countries and some of the biggest maritime nations, for example, China, to ratify the only international agreement that we have currently to tackle IUU fishing globally. And this is the Port State Measures Agreement. That's the name. We need them to be part of it. And other countries as well. And to complement that, a very concrete action that we've actually seen having a very good impact on the ground and benefiting the fisheries related economy in a country are the what we call the seafood import control schemes. So you complement actions in ports with other measures to make sure, because the IUU fishing, this challenge, is still a challenge. We're still 15 years later, 20 years later, still talking about it because there is a market for it. That's the problem, no? It's still being sold. So we need to make sure that the key markets, the EU, the US, Japan, China, again, the UK is now thinking of by the way, of putting in place some very ambitious policies, and hopefully they'll do that, to check exactly what's coming in and out from their markets. It cannot be that Japan consuming many more species than the US consumers, because they love fish and they eat anything and everything, that they don't know that whether it is legal or illegal. I mean, that cannot be happening in 2021. And so import control schemes are key. And then a key word for us is transparency. So, and some of the questions in the chat kind of touches on this. So the ocean is vast. We have a blue planet. It's physically impossible to have patrol vessels all around the ocean. It's impossible. It would take it would be too expensive as well. So we need one of the cost-effective means to achieve some type of control, some type of accountability as well, is transparency, making sure that countries start to publish who is fishing where, how many vessels do you have, they are owned by whom. Okay, this is the first owner, but who is the real beneficial owner? So where is the money coming from? Maybe it's not Taiwan, maybe it's coming from China, but it's a Taiwanese vessel. So all of that, it's super opaque right now. We don't know who is who owns this vessel, etc. So making these elements transparent could change totally the game in fisheries. And I wanted to mention that we actually have done the analysis. We've done the homework for these key actors, and we have the transparency principles and the 30 governance criteria as well. So anyone who wants to take action, they just, they can contact us. They can go on iuuwatch.eu and check there what is it that they can do concretely. And then moving on to aquaculture, clearly, so I'm not sure, James, whether fisheries will be out of the game in 50 years. I don't know. I think the consumer will say that maybe, maybe in 150, maybe in 200 years. I was
being a bit facetious there, but
of course,
I was trying to make a point.
Yeah, definitely. But indeed, it is part of the future. I mean, it will be there. It will only increase its importance. And like you were saying very well, we need to make sure that as it grows, it does in a sustainable manner, no? And the challenges that aquaculture currently shows, like water pollution, genetic impacts, or habitat degradation, we know them, we know the challenges, and we need to use science, the available science, and improve technology, etc., to tackle these challenges. And one very practical step that I wanted to share with you, and it touches on the investment word, is that at TNC, we have recently partnered with a sustainable aquaculture accelerator, precisely to use our science, our technical knowledge with their investment money to invest in businesses that want to make sure that their aquaculture activities are truly sustainable based on objective scientific criteria, not just the yes, we're sustainable, that's it. No. What do you mean? How do we define that? So we've just launched this investment, the Blue Revolution Fund. It's a fund, an investment fund for that, to ensure sustainable aquaculture with capital letters, or using real science. And that's in a nutshell. That's what I wanted to propose, Adrien. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marta. And like James, thank you for the perfect segue to my next question, which is to Chris with his Ocean 14 Capital hat. So indeed, we have talked about how technologies or innovative business models could help us transition our fisheries and aquaculture towards a truly sustainable or even regenerative model. So we'd love to hear from you. And I think there are a number of venture capitalists or investors in the room who are not yet into the blue space. So if you could help us excite them about all these innovative trends that you see with Ocean 14 Capital, we'd love to hear that.
Sure. So just to sort of clarify, Ocean 14 Capital is it's a growth equity fund. We're a 150 million euro fund focused on the blue economy, and we're very focused on what we believe is the most de-risked and transformational play that we can have, and that's the existing industry. So, you know, we're not going to be investing in these very hopeful early stage technologies that may or may not succeed of doing something in 20 years' time. We believe that the biggest opportunity where you have this convergence of drivers, where we can have economic gains and sustainability gains at the same time, is to focus on the existing industry. There's, as you said in your opening statement, there's a huge blue economy that has been overlooked by investors. It's pretty flabby. It's not utilizing technology. It's not utilizing lean manufacturing. It's not utilizing all the innovations that are being utilized in other industries and on land. And we believe the opportunity where we can have the most significant change and impact on the ocean health is by improving the sustainability gains and therefore the financial gains of these existing industries. So let me take you to a couple of examples. If you look at aquaculture, which we're talking about, for instance, if we were to invest in an aquaculture company, and I was in Portugal 2 weeks ago, looking at an investment, which I think one of the questions was, are there any more natural ways of farming fish? And this is a sustainable pond farm, and it actually uses the seawater to clean it. The fish are much more sustainable. They're much more healthy. They're not in cages, much less antibiotics. It's a very, very sustainable way of farming sea bass and sea bream. But what we would do is we'd look at an aquaculture business, and we would see how can we improve that business? How could we change its fish feed? Could we bring in alternatives to fish protein? Could we bring in insect protein? Could we bring in seaweed? Could we bring in other ways of making sure that aquaculture business had a much better fish in, fish out ratio? Because if you can do that on an existing industry and you can transform that, the positive impact you're going to have on the ocean is really quite big. Similarly with seaweed, kelp, all the natural solutions, there's this amazing industry which is very fragmented. It's lots of little mum and pop shops all over the place. The opportunity to put in growth capital, build, you know, platforms through mergers and acquisitions, and actually build seaweed, significant scalable seaweed company is there. But we believe that the way that we can have the most impact, as I said, with this convergence of drivers, the most de-risked investment strategy is focus on the existing industries, and then to play some venture bets, which are sort of, not very early, the late stage venture, sort of series A, B, that are that are synergistic with the growth investments that we'd make. So an example being, if we're investing in an aquaculture business, we would then, as a growth stage business, we would then invest in an alternative fish protein as a venture business, and then you can start plugging those together, and then you can build a platform and scale it. And we believe that that's the biggest opportunity. As we know, 2/3 of businesses in the blue economy rely on a healthy ocean, right? So you've got to have both. And we believe with regulation, with consumer demand, with government changes, people want sustainable fish. They want alternatives to protein. They want new models for packaging, new plastics innovations. So there's this real sort of win-win-win opportunity where we can drive sustainability gains and economic gains at the same time. And I think that's, just putting a plug in for Ocean 14, that's why we're so unique, because we are focused on that middle ground. You know, there's a lot of early stage incubators. You know, Marta, you just mentioned your one. There's one in the Valley, SOA. There's another one in Norway. You know, there's some great places which we have great relationships with them all, but they're really early. You know, it's a high risk. Hopefully they'll work. Where we are, which is there's hardly anyone, is these existing sort of SMEs where we can help them grow, help them scale, and then flog them to the big private equity companies that are looking for deals, but there aren't deals that with tickets that are big enough yet. So we can grow these platforms to help them to be able to sell to them. And it's a exciting space, and we believe that we can have a really significant impact on the ocean, and that we've got the thesis to get the necessary institutional capital into the space which is needed, because if we're going to solve the crisis in the ocean, it's not going to be from 100, 200 million, it's billions that's needed to transform, to improve these industries, to make them more sustainable, and drive not just sustainable businesses, but regenerative businesses, because that's what we absolutely need. We need to regenerate the ocean to health, feed the world, and we can make money at the same time.
Thank you so much, Chris, for this very enlightening landscape of the where we need capital and what are the promising solutions in the space. And even if it was not scripted, again, thank you for opening me to this perfect transition to my last question to James, because I really wanted to talk about, we've talked about a lot of finfish, either in wild-caught fisheries or in mariculture, land-based or marine-based, but there is also this very interesting lower trophic play when it comes to oysters, to mussels, to seaweed, as Chris you mentioned, and which pleased me with my hat of Seaweed for Europe program director, of course. So these different types of mariculture, indeed, they will require no land, no pesticides, no feed, which is one of the big constraints with finfish farming. And they can have this bioremediation power of indeed improving the water quality, absorbing carbon, absorbing nutrients, and so on. So we've talked with Marta about the policies we want to see tomorrow, and now we know what we need to advocate for. We talked with Chris about all these new technologies and SMEs that can help make our existing industry more resilient and more sustainable. So James, would love to hear from you now about this kind of new frontier or new markets and new industries appearing in this lower trophic mariculture. So where do you see the future of them in the UK and more broadly speaking, and what would it take to accelerate their development in your mind?
I think the UK is a strange one in that we're not great consumers of shellfish, and actually we have the capacity to produce way more than we require, and so there is a big export market that we're trying to fill as well. But I mean, even kind of technological improvements in terms of mussel farming, and they're not so that when I say technology, it's more kind of mechanical technologies, sort of the New Zealand long line and dropper system that's been adopted in the UK. Certainly we've adopted it in Cornwall, and a lot of the guys at Shetland have adopted, which is effectively having kilometers and kilometers of rope in the water, kind of going up, down, and the spat in the spring attaches to those ropes. And there's some husbandry that goes on over the year of kind of stripping them off, putting them putting them into size order, and then growing them on for the kind of 18-month growth cycle. But as you say, they're fantastic fantastic at cleaning water, fantastic at sequestering carbon. They're a great source of protein, and whether or not they are very scalable. I think I said right at the start, it's I really believe that kind of offshore farming is super sustainable. You can keep on increasing the size of these farms as long as you know the carrying capacity of where you are. If you're in a cove, and there will be a certain carrying capacity as far as how much natural feed you can take out of the water before it has a detrimental effect on other species there. But that's kind of quite carefully regulated in the UK, and you're way below it. And so there are kind of improvements just in kind of husbandry and management of these farms. It is more farming than fishing. You're kind of looking a year or 2, 3 down the line, and you're planning your stocks. So I think those sort of farms, there's huge potential in the UK. I think the big constraints are land, there is competition for space off the coast. We have a lot of recreational usage. We have a lot of areas where that maybe there's too much pollution to put these kind of farms. Obviously, they need to be in A or B waters. And then, so regulation, that's something that we've been working on, as you mentioned at the start. I sit on a group called the Aquaculture Leadership Group, and we've been trying to work with DEFRA and CFAS and the MMO to try and streamline some of these regulations. At the moment, there's a farm off the south coast. I think they spent 6 years and £500,000 trying to get a license for a mussel farm. In this instance, it was a particularly big one, but still, it kind of shows that it's not something you can just jump into, and certainly it puts off a lot of kind of smaller businesses because they just don't have the resource to start a new farm from scratch. So a lot of these businesses are kind of traditional, been around a couple of 100 years, and there's oystermen around who've been 7th generation. But I think the scope there, certainly we've talked about mussels, oysters, growing, ranching scallops, so trying to kind of phase out some of the scallop dredging and maybe moving towards a ranching system. In Japan, they've got technology where there are machines now to drill the ears. So you kind of grow your spat, wait until it's a certain size, and then you drill a hole through the ear. It's all automated, so they kind of pop up on a machine and get drilled, and then that gets attached to a rope. That rope gets hung in the water, and then they grow on that rope until you're ready to harvest them. And so super sustainable. Again, they're taking the feed naturally out of the water, cleaning the water, and you're reducing the amount of dredging that's required. So, and hatcheries can feed that with, land-based hatcheries can be the source of seed. So again, you don't have to dredge for the seed. I think Europe are fantastic consumers of shellfish. I think in the UK, the government and a lot of the retailers got a bit of work to do to try and encourage the consumers. Although I think one thing that COVID's done actually is kind of, we found actually an uptick in consumption of shellfish, because I think people have just got more adventurous at home kind of cooking. So from a UK perspective, that's kind of what's going on. There's people looking at kind of more ranching methods and what can be done in these kind of coastal zones that are designated for shellfish waters. And then globally, you've touched on seaweed and these other practices of kind of long line and dropper systems for the various species. We've looked at abalone in the UK. It's kind of very high value species. Starting them off on land in hatcheries, and then when they get to that's usually the early stages. If high mortality rates at early stage, so if you can get them through that hatchery stage on land, a bit like with the salmon farms, as soon as they get and they're pretty robust, then you put them out to sea. And so I don't know if that's kind of hopefully answered some of your queries.
Yeah, thank you very much, James, and I hope everybody feels the passion and enthusiasm the four of us share when it comes to these topics. We have just 6 minutes left, which is not so much, but there are a number of very interesting questions that I'd like to ask our panelists. And I'm going to do something that was maybe not expected, but there is one question in particular when it comes to ocean finance, which is actually covering two questions. There is one about the role of blended finance structures in this ocean space, and I'd like to say a word about that, and then give the floor to Chris to talk about blue bonds and the potential of replication of that. So the reason I wanted to say a word on that is that I'm currently also working with the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, which is a $500 million fund, which is in the making and aims to become one of these kind of first blended vehicles to lead the way towards the new financing mechanism in the ocean space. So this fund aims at investing in solutions to protect, restore, and conserve coral reefs. But because we know that the pipeline is not necessarily there, that the risk level is not necessarily there, this fund is structured with a grant window that is covering a fourth of the fund, and this money will be disbursed to stimulate the pipeline, de-risk deals, and provide technical assistance, where the 3 other quarters of the fund will be invested with private level expected returns to make it work. And on top of that, we're also trying to secure a number of guarantees. So again, to provide a level of risk that is acceptable for private investors to draw more capital in the space. So absolutely, we will need more of these blended vehicles, and this is one of the ways we can continue to boost the pipeline and bring more companies typically to growth investors like Chris. Chris, do you want to complement that and also say a few words about blue bonds and the Seychelles example and potential for replication?
Yeah. I mean, I think, but the Nature Conservancy did the Seychelles blue bond. I think the opportunity for where we're focusing on is private equity. You know, I think that's the opportunity, as I said, for the existing industry to help that grow. That needs money, and it needs more vehicles that are focused on impact investing to attract the institutional investors. The institutional investors are desperately looking for impact funds. They're desperately looking for climate and blue economy funds. You know, one of the biggest challenges, I think, is, you know, institutional investors don't like first-time funds, right? Aren't many second-time funds in the impact space, because, as we all know, it's relatively new. So we all need to move the impact funds forward, get a good track record, then all the institutional money will come. In terms of blended finance, yes, there's opportunities, there's models. I think, you know, there's benefits and there's negatives to it. I think, you know, from a conservation perspective, absolutely, we need government money, we need bonds, we need financial instruments. You know, we just hosted probably the most important conference on blue carbon last week. If anybody wants to watch that, it was recorded, but it was, you know, it was focusing on, you know, how blue carbon and the securitization is going to have a huge impact on conservation and the ocean. You know, there's a big interest in it at the moment. We know that the ocean sequesters, you know, 50% plus of the carbon that we produce. We don't know exactly how much where. That's the problem. The science isn't there in terms of whether or not the seaweed is a plant or the mud is actually sequestering the carbon. So we need to get the science absolutely correct. But that will absolutely unlock a huge amount of money, government money. And I think that will give a real opportunity for blended finance for conservation projects. I think that for me, the ultimate win is when we can actually create vast marine protected areas, vast areas of mangrove protected through the securitization of that through blue carbon, which is then is normally going to be the small island states or the global ocean countries, I like to call them. It's giving them income to keep these areas protected. So instead of chopping down the mangrove forest to create, you know, unsustainable shrimp farms, they're going to keep that mangrove forest because they're actually getting a very, very good income from the carbon credits. So I think all of those models are being looked at. Blue bonds are hot, blue carbon is hot, the ocean is literally hot right now. So I think we'll see a lot more of that. But, you know, our focus very much is attracting, you know, private equity money, you know, family offices, institutional investors. Eventually they're coming in to help grow the blue economy.
Thank you, Chris. And on this note, stay tuned. Seaweed for Europe will be releasing next month or so an analysis on the seaweed pipeline of companies. So for family offices and impact investors, you will realize that there is already a robust pipeline of companies, promising companies with a high tier level in Europe. Right. Marta, in 1 minute, there was a number of questions, but let's pick one about MPAs. So indeed, in principles, it looks like a very compelling way of managing the ocean, especially the way Chris has explained it to us. But how do we deal with implementation and enforcement, especially in remote areas where it feels like hard to properly enforce?
Yeah, it's not an easy question, but so first we need a regime that allows adoption of MPAs in the high seas. We don't even have that, okay? So we are not even thinking of implementation and enforcement. We don't have any mechanism to identify and then establish and then make sure that there are management plans, etc., finance, etc., to make those MPAs effective. So that is first, and that is with the High Seas Treaty, okay? So that is a very clear example of why we need that treaty for the high seas. No one's lands, like someone in the audience was calling this. Implementation and enforcement, etc. So in my view, technology is going to have a key role in it because it is physically impossible to be on the water checking what's happening in these places so remote.
There's a lot of brilliant innovations in satellite monitoring, data tracking that we're certainly looking at, which is making it's getting better. Getting better.
Exactly. And then, but then the good, the key question is, okay, there is a violation. Imagine it's the high seas, because no one owns it. No one and everyone owns this. Who takes action? Who sanctions? Who is the authority, or which one is the authority? So that is yet to be defined in that treaty. Now we have some ideas. We want the treaty to have teeth. When I was saying earlier, we need something ambitious with teeth, with meaning. It means that with certain bodies made by the countries, but certain bodies that will take action, and that there is some way of sanction, because otherwise, it's not that I'm personally in favor of sanctions per se, but otherwise there is little or no accountability. We have seen that in many other areas. No, so there are ways, but it's not an easy answer. And the starting point for sure is the High Seas Treaty, ASAP and ambitious.
Thank you, Marta. Marcus, do we have time, 1 more minute for a question to James, or do we need to close now?
Definitely have time for more questions.
Excellent. James, I don't know if this is a topic you know that much, but I quite like this question, who was pushing us on. We have talked a lot about environmental sustainability, but what about social, or even what about animal welfare? And let's maybe focus on the later. So when we talk about sustainability in mariculture, or in land-based mariculture, what is the status quo today, and challenges and progress you see when it comes to animal welfare?
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the ones the main thing that I left out from my first kind of first comments is that's something that I think all when we get down to the level of the consumers and the retailers, obviously they are the drivers, but it's down to us as the farmers to make sure that the animal is treated in the best possible way, and I even mean that right the way down from kind of bivalves upwards. I mean, this is we've got an organic standard, and people occasionally say to me, well, what do you mean organic for mussels? How can you have an organic mussel that's grown in the sea? And so where that comes down to, and so the Soil Association are very specific about the mussel as an animal and our stocking densities, and just not having too many, not having too many ropes out there. And we're talking about carrying capacity, not kind of overloading the system you're in. There have been examples of certain farms around the world where they've tried that carrying capacity that we're talking about. They've tried to put too much, too high a stocking density, and it's just detrimental to whatever that animal is. And actually, it doesn't do the farmer any favors, because in the long run, usually disease and ill health come out of an unhealthy environment. So a sick animal, whatever it might be, they don't grow very well. From a purely kind of commercial point of view, a very, very healthy fish will convert what they call feed conversion ratio. So your FCR, you want it as low as possible. So you want a kilo of feed in an ideal world, 1 kilo of feed to become 1 kilo of fish. That's, kind of as a farmer, that's what you're aiming for. To get that, you can't get that with an unhealthy fish. A fish that's sick or that is stressed, and you obviously can measure cortisol. Cortisol in the water, I mean, is actually it can travel from fish to fish through the water. I mean, it's really kind of dangerous, stressor, and so stressed fish is just not a good thing, and that's true of cage farming, and it's true of these RAS recirculating systems. The farmer is spending their whole time thinking about the welfare of that fish, because actually it's good for business. You want a healthy fish that doesn't get sick, doesn't require an intervention, doesn't require antibiotics. It grows well and naturally. And certain fish have different stocking densities, and that has to be considered. And that's down to the fisherman, or the kind of the fish farmer working with the scientists to say, right, what is this species? What does it actually want? Does it swim in groups, in which case its stocking density is very high? Tilapia's got some seriously high stocking density, or does it is it a kind of or do they prefer to be further apart? And that will kind of there will be a sweet spot where the fish is feeling super comfortable. And it's the same as land-based farm, animal land-based farming. You are trying to look after that animal as best you can, and that yes, should be sort of super regulated, but probably shouldn't really need to be. The farmers should be considering that, because when they're building their systems and they're building their farming process, and be it offshore or a recirc on land, or a hybrid between the two, these flow-through systems, that's what they should be thinking about. So I don't know if that kind of answers some of that.
Thank you very much, James. And I think this time is a good time to wrap up and to thank our wonderful speakers for all these great insights. I really hope that after this 1 hour with us, you share our passion and hope for transforming our system towards a truly sustainable ocean economy and ocean system. And I will thank you also the Conduit for hosting us tonight, and I will hand over to Marcus to properly close us from an administrative point of view. Thank you very much for your time.
Brilliant, and huge thanks to you, Adrien, and of course our wonderful panelists, Marta, Chris, and James. Thank you all for attending tonight. We'll be following up with a recording of the event shortly. We certainly look forward to seeing you at some of the Conduit's future events, and hope you all have a very wonderful evening. Take care, everyone.